Chapter 19 of Banking Under Difficulties by George Ogilvy Preshaw. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Beeswax Candle. Chapter 19. 20th December 1864. Captain Leach of the SS Nelson visited Okotika and satisfied himself that he could take his steamer into the river. The owners, N. Edwards and Company of Nelson, chartered her on her first trip to Messrs. Ferguson and Buchanan. Up to this time, these gentlemen had been engaged as packers, but they now started business as storekeepers in Okotika. The river was full of snags, many of which could not be seen at high water, and were therefore dangerous for vessels entering without a pilot. A boatman named James Tier acted on this occasion. The sea was as smooth as glass, so smooth that he crossed the bar alone in his boat and piloted the vessel in safety. She was full of cargo, and crowded with passengers. Brougham and I were on the south spit and assisted to make her fast. The passengers were taken to the north side of the river, where the township of Hokitika now stands, by boat. The place at that time was one mass of driftwood, so thick that it was impossible to get a horse or wagon through without clearing it away. The cargo was discharged inside the river on the beach, and at a point close to the sea. A storm coming on and a fresh in the river, a lot of goods were carried out to sea before they could be removed. Some of the storekeepers sustained severe loss. Waite was one of the numbers, and J.R. Fraser another. Ferguson and Buchanan had erected a store on the south beach, but, afraid of it being washed away, removed it over to the north side. On the passengers being landed, there was quite a rush for allotments. Amongst the first marked out were those for Cassius and Comiskey, the Bank of New Zealand, and Ferguson and Buchanan. I did not mark out one, but got the mailbag and rode off to the Grey. I reached there at 10 o'clock at night, and rather astonished Mrs. Waite by putting in an appearance at that hour, and with the mail. When I returned to Okotika the next day, I scarcely knew the place. It had so changed in appearance, even in that short time. Buildings were going up in all directions. The inspector of the Bank of New Zealand decided to put up a building, which he did as soon as timber was procurable. I agitated for an office, and was informed that one would be provided if the rush turned out a good one. As soon as the Bank of New Zealand building was finished, 2 or 3 hands were sent down, and an agency opened. I was then working at a great disadvantage, inasmuch as Walmsley was still my opponent in the field, and his bank, having an office in Okotika, had by far the best chance of securing the business accounts, and of this they did not fail to take advantage. Notwithstanding such odds against me, I managed to hold my own, especially in the gold purchases. Mr. Revel, the warden, was busy most of the day marking off sites of 40 feet frontage. He also laid out 2 streets and measured off the different allotments, reserving 1 chain frontage to the river and 40 feet wide for the street. Several disputes have already risen. Not a ripple on the bar. The captain of the Wallaby crossed it today in his boat, taking soundings. Cassius opened a store. 21st December. Sergeant Brougham marked out the camp, on which site now stands the Bank of New Zealand, Town Hall, Union Bank, drill shed, and other buildings. His tent was pitched here, and here I was generally to be found at meal times. 22nd December. The cutter Nugget of Invercargill and the cutter Petrel arrived from Jackson's Bay with 39 men, who have been prospecting in that locality. Barrington and party amongst the number. Christmas Day of this year fell upon a Sunday. I was busy all day buying gold, etc. A short time after I got to bed, my saddlebags being under my head and revolver at my side, 3 drunken men rushed in. One came to me, took my hat from over my eyes, and said to the others, "By dad, it's the banker. Suppose we give him a crack on the head with a stick." And off they went into the bar. I have often heard it said that when people are drowning, the principal events of their lives pass through their brain. So it was with me in this instance. I thought of all sorts of things, and at the same time made up my mind what to do. I knew perfectly well, should any scrimmage take place and the report of a pistol be heard, There were so many maniacs about that, without inquiring why or wherefore, but eager for the fray, they would rush in, and I would stand a very poor show. Still, I had to protect myself and the bank property as far as I could, and this I was determined to do. I turned with my face to the door and took out my revolver, which I always kept in good order, and waited. They had drinks at the bar, and away they went. I did not see any more of them. My idea was, had they shown up again to challenge the first man at the doorway, had he attempted to advance, fire. I knew I could depend on my revolver, and unless the mob tore down the tent, I was good for 6 of them. All I can say is that I was in a very awkward predicament, and was not at all sorry that they did not turn up again. I've often thought since what risks Walmsley and I ran, both of our lives and of the bank property. Fortunately for us, Burgess and party were not on the coast. Had they been, we would have stood but a poor show. 28th December. A dispute arose this morning between Messrs. Cassidy and Price about one of the business sites. Mr. Revel was called on, decided in favour of Cassidy. Price persisted in putting down his pegs and digging post holes. Mr. Revel interfering, Price made a blow at him with a shovel, striking him across the instep of his left foot. I was present when the assault took place. The allotment in dispute was marked out by Mr. Cassidy, and adjoined the one occupied by Messrs. Price and Hudson, the first storekeepers at Hokitika. It seemed hard that these men should not be allowed an extra allotment or two, having been the pioneers of the place. Still, not having applied for an increased area, Cassidy was fairly entitled to it, having marked out the ground. As far as my recollection serves me, Price apologized to Mr. Revel for his conduct, and was let off with a stern lecture. 15th January 1865. Mr. Cassius appointed postmaster pro tem. He did not retain the position long, a young man named Andrews being sent down from Nelson. He was only on the coast a few months, and Mr. Keogh was appointed. After him a Mr. Stevenson, who was in Hokitika for some considerable time. When he left, Mr. Curtin was appointed. 16th January. A heavy fresh in the river, bringing down huge trees and washing away the river banks. One store on the south side had to be shifted for fear of it being washed away. 26th January. The steamer Wallaby arrived at the Grey with His Honour the Superintendent of Nelson, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Blackett, and Captain Walmsley, Chief Postmaster of Nelson. On the return trip of the Wallaby to Nelson, when off the Buller, the day being fine and the sea smooth, a boat was put off. In it Mr. Robertson and several others. When crossing the bar she capsized, and His Honour was drowned. The body was never discovered. James Tier, before mentioned as piloting in the Nelson on her first trip, is now, or was when I left Hokitika in 1874, a boatman on the Hokitika River. He was one of the 14 survivors of the General Grant, which was wrecked on the Auckland Islands. He was on the island for nearly 2 years, and a rough time he had of it. The General Grant had £20,000 worth of gold on board, which went down with her, and this is still at the bottom of the deep blue sea. Whether it will ever be recovered is very doubtful, the ship having run into a cave of rocks against which the waves are always beating. One party from Nelson went down, but the expedition failed on account of the weather not being fine enough to allow the divers to go down. Tier went with the party, and is living in hopes of again visiting the spot and securing the gold. When washed ashore, one of the 14 had 2 dry matches. The fire they lighted was sacred. Something dreadful was agreed upon as the penalty for letting that fire go out. Drinking cups were scooped out of roots, and ropes were made of native flax. Wild pigs were plentiful, but how to get them was the thing, the party having no guns nor dogs. Tier invented something, which was no more or less than a barbed hook at the end of a flax rope baited. With this they caught as many pigs as they required. About this time, a new rush broke out at the Totra, 16 miles south of Hokitika. I went down to have a look at this, and found it was 7 miles inland and up a creek called Jones. Here I found a calico township, but there not being much doing in my line, I did not make a long stay, but returned to the foot of the river the same evening, where I, in company with some packers, camped. I put a halter on Nobby and tied him up. Next morning he was not to be found. He had bitten the rope through. I walked to Okotika, where I heard of him. He was at the Arahura on a patch of feed he had found out on the way up. On my second trip from the Totara, I was detained on the South Spit for 2 days, owing to a heavy fresh in the river. I camped with Maine, a storekeeper, and was provided with a rough stretcher, and was comfortable enough as far as bed and bedding was concerned. The first night I went to bed, expecting to get a comfortable night's rest, but was sadly disappointed. As soon as I got into bed, the mosquitoes came buzzing about, so I put my head under the blankets. In a few minutes I felt something heavy running over me. I jumped up and found the place full of bush rats. I beat them off till I was fairly tired, and found that with these pests and the mosquitoes there was but very little chance of getting any sleep. So I took my blankets, went down to the beach, where I lay on a couple of logs with a piece of wood for my pillow. On my return to Okotika, I received advice that an assistant, Mr. B, would be sent me from Dunedin. The poor fellow never reached the coast. He was drowned in the city of Dunedin on her way from Dunedin. She must have foundered, as she was never seen or heard of after leaving Wellington. A young man named Kempthorne was sent down, but as he was suffering from a severe attack of asthma, I sent him back by the same steamer on which he came. He, poor fellow, was drowned some years after in the harbour of Dunedin while boating with 2 or 3 others. The boat capsized, and he, although a good swimmer, was drowned. His body was never recovered. On one of my trips from the Greenstone, the Teramako being flooded, I had to walk from the Hohuna to Teramako, carrying with me about 300 ounces of gold. I was in company with Harry Revel, a brother of the warden, a big, powerful man, who kindly exchanged swags with me occasionally, I taking his blankets, and he my gold, which for me was a pleasant exchange. The following week, the rivers being still flooded, and knowing that my customers had a lot of gold on hand, I rode up overnight from Greymouth and stayed at Brougham's, intending to make a start from Teramako at daylight. However, on talking the matter over with him and finding that I would have to walk first 20 miles up and then back that distance, with about 50 pounds weight of gold and possibly alone, I changed my mind. Not but that the will was good to do the deed, but simply because I did not feel up to it. So next morning I returned to the Grey. Later in the day I learnt that Walmsley started from the Grey at daylight, and then he rode to the Teramako and walked the rest of the way, returning on Monday evening with between 500 and 600 ounces of gold. For the first time since our arrival on the coast, he had the largest escort, he having purchased my gold in addition to his own. My customers kept their gold up to the last, making sure I would turn up, but finding I did not put in an appearance, they sold to him. What will a zealous banker not do? What we should have done was to erect offices at the Grey and allow storekeepers and diggers to come to us, instead of our running after them. In place of this, each manager was chasing the other all over the country, crossing, often swimming, dangerous rivers, carrying gold on our backs like beasts of burden, sleeping on the damp ground, camping out in all weathers, and, of course, risking our lives. It's all very well to see these things afterwards, but at the time, with an opponent in the field, one is anxious to do his best. End of chapter 19.